right, so it seems like we are ready to go. So before we begin, I'd like to just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Aarav Makadia. I'm the president of the Internatus Business Club of New Jersey, also commonly referred to as IBCNJ, and I'm also a junior at Monroe Township High School, which is around the Princeton area. And so on behalf of our partners and other affiliates, I'd like to just welcome everyone here today to our Corporate and Securities Law event with Mr. Randall Clark, who is a corporate and securities partner at Gunderson Dettmer in New York. However, a couple of things before we start here today. Should any of our members find themselves curious or unaware about anything that we discuss throughout the duration of the event, please be sure to direct any of your questions to Jeremy Slayton in the chat, who will lead our final Q&A session towards the end of the panel. And in addition to that, since some of our members have signed the member consent form, please be sure to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to speak during the Q&A so we can allow you to ask your question directly to Mr. Clark, and be sure to turn on your camera and speak accordingly as well. Also, for those of you who might be tuning in online, the Internatus Business Club, or IBC, is a national non-for-profit collection of business clubs which consists of emerging student leaders who share the common goal of providing value to society. IBC members have access to selective networking events, workshops, quarterly business forums, exclusive scholarship opportunities, and internships at select partners across the country, as well as community initiative opportunities. And so for more information on that, feel free to check out internatus.org. And so without further ado, let me allow Mr. Clark to introduce himself and tell us a bit more about him.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm Randall. As he mentioned, a partner at a firm called Gunderson Dettmer here in New York City, where I'm currently located. And to give you a quick overview of kind of my practice and the firm, we are a boutique law firm that only works with startups, venture capital funds, and emerging growth companies. And so if you think about, most of the apps on your phones, from things like Uber and Airbnb, most of those companies began as startups with a team of one or more founders, and kind of grew their business through a funding mechanism known as venture capital before becoming household names or going public or getting acquired and that sort of thing. And so that's my my firm's claim to fame, is that we only represent startups and venture capital funds, and that's how I spend most of my days these days. So with that, I'm happy to kind of keep things moving. I think we had some questions or some topics I was supposed to cover kind of one after the other. Is that how this should work?
Yeah, so yeah, we'd be happy to start on some questions then. So I pass it on to Zain, who has done a great job kind of creating all of the questions we have today.
Awesome.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Zain Sohail, the Director of Strategic Initiatives here. And yeah, we'll get into our prepared Q&A, and after that, we'll go into our audience Q&A. So our first question for you is really, what attracted you to corporate law over other fields as a whole, as well as other fields of law?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I don't think I intended to be a lawyer. So when I was in high school, I wanted to actually be a film director. And so like I had following my senior year in high school, I'd won a competition to represent the state of Texas in like a national video production competition. My partner and I went off to national competition, I think it was in Kansas City, Missouri, and ended up winning nationals that year. So right after I graduated from high school. And so I had every intention of being, the next Spike Lee or something. And when I went to the University of Texas, I majored in radio, TV, film. And so, it's a very, my path to being a corporate lawyer is a weird one because, I think I spent a lot of time just trying a bunch of different things. It's a little bit like, looking back, it's a little weird to me that that students are kind of required to major or to pick a major so early. It would seem to make more sense to me to do that after a couple years in college instead of right at the outset, because you change a lot between 18 and 22, and your interest and that sort of things change. And so like that's kind of how my path went. Is like I came in to be a film director, but then once I actually started film school, decided this is actually not what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so I then began like figuring out where my passion was. And so I double majored in business, which is why you can kind of see like I did 2 degrees. So film, I finished it out, but I also got a degree in marketing because I wanted to do something more business focused, but not finance, something that could kind of maybe thread like the needle between business and like the creative itch that I have, which I viewed as like marketing. Maybe I would get into something on like the PR side or advertising. And then I just tried a bunch of internships. So after my sophomore year in high school, I did through a program called SEO, a investment banking internship on Wall Street. So I spent the summer after my sophomore year working on Wall Street for Citigroup, and decided at the end of the summer, I don't want to be an investment banker. And so it's kind of like back to the drawing board. I started to like focus my junior year in college on advertising. I did another internship after my junior year in college where I was working at an advertising agency in Kansas City, Missouri. And at the end of that summer, I decided I don't want to be in advertising. Back to the drawing board we go. And so like I took a business law class my kind of last year or senior year in college, and it was the most challenging course I think I'd ever taken in my life. Like school is one of those things that for some of those people, it's like studying for tests and was not really my thing, but I was still able to do pretty well academically, and school always came a bit easy to me. But that was one class, a business law class, where it was like I felt really challenged academically. It was taught by a local law professor from St. Mary's, and it was taught through what's known as the Socratic method, which is the way that law school classes in many cases are taught. And if you don't know what the Socratic method is, it's more so instead of a professor lecturing you, they call on you and say, Mr. Clark, stand up. And I stand up, and around all my classmates, your armpits start to sweat a little bit, and they just ask you questions over and over again and try to like screw with your head and twist you around in knots and that sort of thing. And it was just like exhilarating for me. And I was just like, I don't know. It was like that class where I didn't know for sure that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I knew I wanted to go to law school. And so I took the LSAT more so to because I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I figured that would buy me 3 more years of figuring out what I wanted to do while I went to grad school. And so I took the LSAT, got into Harvard, obviously, and but still with no intentions of actually practicing law. I thought I might go into like consulting for like a McKinsey or a Bain, or maybe work for like the CIA or do something. Like I was going to figure it out while I was at Harvard. But then, this might, so I went to law school between 2007 and 2010. And so if, I don't know the exact age, you all were around that time, but that is during the Great Recession for the United States. And so the economy kind of tanked in 2008. All the mortgage-backed securities and the whole real estate market kind of collapsed, and lots of bailouts for banks and that sort of thing. And so the job market was very, very tough when when I was in law school, both for students who were looking to practice law or to do things outside of law like I was. And so part of the reason that I got into practicing corporate law was out of necessity. Like the job that I had in, the greatest recession of my lifetime was a corporate law job. I was fortunate to get an offer from Sullivan Cromwell, which is, a really reputable firm in New York City. And so that's what I plan to do. But while I was in law school, my last semester in law school, I took a class on venture capital and entrepreneurship, and that put ECVC law, so emerging company venture capital law, on my radar, and for the first time, and so I knew that, like, if I ever had the option to work with startups, technology companies, venture capital funds, I was going to jump at it, and because I viewed startups and tech companies as the future. So my theory back in 2010 was, the future Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, were going to be these tech companies in my cell phone who were disrupting industries like Airbnb did for hospitality, and Uber had done for commuting and that sort of thing. My theory was, 11 years ago, was that that's where the future is at, from a business standpoint. And because I was going to be a corporate lawyer, the legal market follows where it follows the business market, and so I felt that by switching to work in an ECVC practice, I'd be getting in at the ground floor of what I viewed to be the future. And so I had that opportunity when the economy picked up in 2012, so 2 years after I began practicing law, to work for a firm called Gunderson Dettmer, which I had never heard of, but was based in New York, and it only worked with startup companies and venture capital funds. And so even though I had never heard of the firm, it was about 20 something lawyers in New York. When I interviewed, I was all in. And I've been with the firm now for 9 years. I made partner last January. So had a really nice start to my 2020, and dealt with everything that was to come after that, like everyone else. But the rest is, that's kind of how I ended up where I'm at today, and certainly not the most direct path to practicing corporate law, but hopefully that answers your question on kind of why I chose this, and specialize in this space like venture capital. So
yeah, thanks.
What's
That was
next?
great, and definitely pretty reassuring for all of us here too. So our next question is so what do you exactly do as a partner at Gunderson Dettmer, and like what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, it's very unpredictable. So it's a little bit different than, at my old firm, I'd be working on like 2 or 3 mergers at a time. I could kind of know not only how my day was going to look, but how my month was kind of going to look. It's just like, okay, these mergers, I'll be working on them for like maybe a total of 3 or 4 months a piece. And here's kind of how things would go from like this moment until getting them closed. With my practice now, it's a little bit less predictable, right? So, I represent somewhere around 100 companies. So it's a little bit different than having to deal with 2 or 3 things at once. Like I am the lawyer for like 100 startups and like a couple dozen venture capital funds. And so, I never know when someone from any one of those groups is going to email and say, hey, we've got some work for you to do. And so there are days in which it's just coming at me from all angles. And the thing about the practice is that when you're working with startups, it's much different than working with larger companies. Like if you think about a well-established company like a Coca-Cola or something like that, like they've got hundreds of lawyers. They've they've got the way their business runs down to kind of a science. It's tried and true, and so there aren't as many kind of like urgent fire drills that pop up. But when you're working with startups who often don't have any lawyers, in many cases they don't have, in some cases I'm working with just the founders. So like the entire company is just two people or just one person in some cases. There's a lot more that can come up day to day that for clients who are a little bit less established and who don't have kind of established operations and legal teams. And so that can be exciting, right? Because every day looks a little different, but it also makes it a little bit more of a challenge for me to say like, yeah, I'll grab dinner with you tomorrow at like 8 p.m. because I might get 3 or 4 term sheets tomorrow morning that kind of, take up that time at night, because I gotta make sure that the clients are taken care of. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded way of kind of saying that, like, I think my specific day-to-day is very much different from, like, I would say a traditional corporate lawyer who does not focus on working with venture capital funds and startups. And so I'm a generalist, and so it can be any number of things, corporate transactions. And so at any given time, I have companies who are getting formed. So like a founder has an idea for a new startup, and we form his or her company in Delaware. We're getting their stock issued and kind of laying the groundwork for the company to like really sprout. There are equity financings. And so I got a number of companies who are raising money from outside investors in either convertible security financings like notes or safes, or in equity financings. They're selling stock to venture capitalists in private company financings. I've got other companies who are raising debt from lenders like traditional banks. So in those cases, I'm a debt lawyer. I've got companies that are buying other companies right now, or they're selling to other companies, larger companies right now. So in those cases, I'm a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. And then, as a firm, we've got a number of companies who are going public, who are doing, de-SPAC transactions, direct listings. And so in those cases, if it's one of my clients, I'm a capital markets attorney. And so it's like every day looks very, very different. Which makes this job 9 years later still very exciting to me, because there isn't the routine, but with the lack of kind of predictability comes added pressures, right? Where it's a little bit more challenging for you to disconnect from work, because at any given moment, I might get a term sheet for a client who says like, hey, we just got an offer to sell for $500 million. Like if I'm on a beach somewhere, I've got to like boot up my laptop and work on that. And so it's a little bit harder on, the downside to know kind of what your next few days or weeks are going to look like when things can come in at any given moment.
Great. So moving on to the next question, we have, could you talk more about your experience going from an associate to a partner? Because I know that is a pretty large deal from what I know about law firms.
Yeah. So it's, it took a while, and that's the case for most firms. We at Gunderson, we have what's called a partner track. It's 9 years. And so when I was I started off with the firm as a second year associate. And so was up for partner when I was a 9th year associate and was fortunate to get over the hump the first year that I was eligible to be promoted. But in terms of how you get there, it's a combination of two things, right? One is you got to be a really good lawyer. So you got to learn, the nuances of your practice and be able to execute transactions at a level that is kind of at the top of your craft. And so it's so that's the first gating item. But then I think the other important part of kind of trying to be promoted, whether it's within a law firm or if you're at an investment bank or in some kind of financial institution, like a lot of that has to do with mentorship, right? Because you need people to kind of like help you understand like how you're perceived and where your blind spots are and what you can be doing to kind of position yourself to be promoted. And so I had a number of mentors when I was a very young attorney who kind of saw something in me, likely before, I saw, kind of partnership potential in myself. And they would take me on things like client pitches and teach me how to go out and hunt for business and new client relationships. They would, bring me behind the curtain, even though I was like a, 3rd or 4th year associate in, and show me how the sausage is made, like how the business works, how you invoice clients and that sort of thing. And the other thing that they did was they pushed me in a really kind of aggressive way to kind of take on more responsibility very early in my career. And so, my 2nd or 3rd week at the firm, remember I'm a 2nd year associate, and it's a very junior role. But I got asked by one of the founding partners if I wanted, because I'd had some experience with mergers and acquisitions at my old firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, if I wanted to run a merger. And so I asked him, I just kind of inquire, like, you do understand that I'm just a 2nd year associate, because like to run a merger at a traditional law firm like the one that I started with, I think you most likely need to be at least a 5th or a 6th year, maybe, somewhere between a 5th or a 7th year. I was like, well, you do understand that I'm just a 2nd year associate, and I just basically graduated from law school. And his response was like, yeah, and if you're not comfortable with it, then that's totally fine. And I was like, I am absolutely comfortable running a merger as a 2nd year associate. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, and that we were on the same page. And so I went for it. And that was the first deal that I ran, by myself with supervision from one of our partners. But it was selling a company to Airbnb, which Airbnb at the time in 2012 was a hot startup, but it was not the startup that, like, it was not the company that all of you probably know and have used, but it was viewed as one of the darlings of Silicon Valley at the time. And so the firm trusted me as a very junior associate to sell a company to Airbnb, even though I was really, really junior. And they continued that, for the next, 7 years, where I was basically working directly with partners. I was able to take on a number of kind of senior roles, despite, my tenure at the firm and experience level. And as a result, I was able to start developing relationships that positioned me really well to kind of have a practice of my own going into my 9th year when I was up for partner. And so I was basically, by the time I was a senior associate, 7th, 8th year, 9th year associate, I was essentially functioning in many ways as a partner already, in that I was bringing in my own clients in business and was able to kind of run those relationships without supervision. And so, like my experience is kind of unique to me. Like I'm not sure that it's the same as what yours will end up being, or some of my friends who've made partner. I'm not sure if it's the same as theirs, but now I'm in a position to where I can serve as a mentor to junior associates in a way that was done for me, and it's a responsibility and role that I take very seriously. That I do a ton of recruiting of attorneys, and part of my sales pitch to them is that if you come and work with us, you get to work. It comes with my mentorship, and I'm going to teach you the playbook for how to become a partner here one day. And so far it's been a pretty compelling, sales pitch and closing argument, specifically among attorneys of color. Because there's obviously a lack of us, in the industry as a whole, but also among partners at these firms. And so to have someone who looks like you tell you, like, look, I'm going to show you what it takes and teach you how to be a partner at this firm from day one. It's something that not many firms can offer that we're in a position to.
Great. So that was great. Moving on to our next question. So from what I've seen, there is like a common stereotype or stigma against corporate law for like business corruption. So just what's your take on that entire issue?
Yeah. So look, there's so corporate law. There are two types of lawyers. So I'm a transactional lawyer, which means I do deals. I negotiate contracts. I advise boards of directors on strategic matters, their obligations under law, and that sort of thing, and kind of help them navigate landmines as a company is scaling up. So there are transactional lawyers who do deals, like some of the ones that I've mentioned before. And then there are litigators, those are the courtroom lawyers. I don't step foot in courtrooms. And so whenever there are issues, so hopefully my job is to prevent my clients from needing a litigator by advising them as they're growing a company on ways to stay out of hot water. Like, these are the requirements under law. Here are ways that you can fulfill your obligations to stockholders. Here are different avenues you can take that fall on a scale of riskiness, because in some cases the law is unclear, or people take different approaches to things. And so my job is to kind of advise boards and companies on ways in which they can grow the business in a fast pace, but hopefully in a way that keeps them out of trouble. Because like, if you think about the clients that I'm working with, they're in many cases trying to disrupt long-standing institutions. They're trying to change behavior among consumers. They are trying to also, in some cases, change law. Like, you think about a company like Uber, which in some ways operated outside of the lines a little bit from a regulation standpoint, but there was so much consumer adoption of Uber that eventually, like, they were able to change laws to accommodate them. Because you could think that if that didn't happen, the reaction that consumers, folks like you and me who are using Uber every day would be if we couldn't use it anymore. Same thing with a company like Airbnb, and you got all these different lobbying interests among, the hotel industries who don't want to see, something like Airbnb exist because it's going to chip away at their market penetration and share. And then, when there are situations where, companies do step outside the lines, or then that's when a litigator who works in corporate law steps in. And so, corporate litigators, their clients are corporations and businesses, and their job is to ensure that they are defended when they have either civil or other kind of actions that need to be addressed. And so at my old firm, we did have both sides, where we both had a corporate litigation practice, and they're doing things like white collar and securities law compliance and that sort of thing. And then on the other side of the table were the corporate transactional lawyers, still the role that I'm playing to this day, which are helping companies with different transactions that come up day to day, and hopefully, advising them in a way that helps avoid any litigation in the future. And so, like lawyers get a bit of a bad rap for but in many cases, it's necessary for society to progress, to kind of take calculated risk at a business level, like an Uber did, in order to move society forward and push the law to accommodate changing norms and that sort of thing. I think New York State, or just legalized or decriminalized marijuana, which is something that is probably far overdue, and a lot of people who look like me are in jail unnecessarily for what I would consider to be a victimless crime. And so in many cases, there are a number of companies that are probably that are working with cannabis and things like that, and technically they might have some air cover from a legal standpoint under state law, because federal law hasn't moved completely in that direction yet. But in order for things to change, sometimes you kind of got to plow ahead and keep pushing forward and make the legislators adjust to the will of consumers. And I think that that's just another example of that.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely clears up a lot about the entire field. So our last prepared question is just, what advice do you have for us as high schoolers who maybe want to go into corporate law, in terms of what we should do now in high school, then in college, and potentially for law school, and then entering your career?
Yeah, sure. So I think what I would say is, for one, you don't have to major in pre-law, government, poli-sci to be a lawyer. Like, obviously, like I was a film major and a marketing major. You can literally go to law school or grad school in most cases, with any kind of undergrad degree. And so, don't feel obligated to kind of box yourself in, when you start college. Pick a major that you're kind of interested in. And I would just try a lot of things. Try a lot of internships, like I did, different courses, electives, because you're going to, the way that you think will evolve over time, right? And so by trying more things, seeing where your interests are, and trying internships, you can kind of make sure that corporate law is the right thing for you, you might want to, after law school, after undergrad, go work as a paralegal at a corporate law firm for a few years, like 2 years before going to law school, just to see if that's actually what you want to do. Like in many cases, we hire paralegals and they come in and they work for us for, 2 years, and then they go off to law school. But at least in that 2-year period, you get to see what it's like to be in that environment, to make sure that it's what you want to do for your career, because it's not as there are a lot of days in which it's super exciting, and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. But there are a lot of days where I'm kind of just tied to my computer from like the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep. And so it's not exactly like TV or Suits or one of those shows would make it out to be. And so like I think having internships is important. Maybe getting some work experience before going to law school as a paralegal would be a good idea. But the other thing that I think is super critical that, I'm lucky that I kind of landed where I'm at and got into Harvard, despite not having mentors. Like that's the other thing that's super critical, in terms of understanding how you put your best foot forward in getting into a great law school, which is, like the legal market is a bit elitist, I will say, in a way that I didn't appreciate when I was applying to law schools. And it's super prestige driven, to where the school that you go to, it matters a lot. And so it's something to like, I think the benefit of having mentors is that they can help you kind of understand, that process, and with your applications and making sure that you get the internship opportunities that you need to kind of figure out if this is really what you want to do. And mentorship is like super critical. Like I'm the first lawyer in my family, didn't really know lawyers, particularly Black lawyers, growing up. And so, it's kind of challenging if you're in a situation like, I was in, where you don't have them in your family, you don't really know any, but just figure out it, like try to do your best over the course of going to college and that sort of thing, to develop those relationships and find people who are interested in serving those roles, so that when the time comes, you have someone that you can bounce ideas off of, and who can kind of give you their feedback on things. I think that's pretty much it. Try a bunch of things, internships, and try to find mentors in the space, because not only can they kind of help you with the whole law application process, but they can also help you, post law school, when you're trying to figure out how to start your legal career. And you can also use their network. In many cases, like students that I get connected to are through warm intros, where their mentor reaches out to me and says like, hey, I've got a student that I've been mentoring for years. He or she is super smart, and they'd really love to work in a venture capital practice. And so whereas under normal circumstances, that person would have no way of ever being put on my radar. That's the other benefit to not just the legal market, but frankly, all jobs, is what's called the warm intro, where if you have people who can send an email to the decision makers at a company you want to work at, it will give you a leg up in recruiting. So that's not just specific to law. It worked for finance, consulting, startup companies, if you can have someone kind of put your resume at the top of like the hiring partner's inbox, or get them to take a meeting with you, then the onus is on you to kind of close things and to impress them. But there are a lot of people who are able to leverage their mentors and their relationships in ways that get them into that open doors for them. And so like that's the other benefit to mentorship as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And like I said, that was our last prepared question. So thank you for answering all this. It was really genuinely insightful. So now I'm going to pass it on to Jeremy Slayton, our VP, to handle the audience Q&A.
Awesome.
All right, so thank you, Zain, and hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Slayton. I am a junior at the Bergen County Academies in the Academy for Business and Finance. I'm the Vice President of IBC New Jersey. Thank you so much to Mr. Clark for being here today, as well as all of our members for coming out as well. So as Zain said, I will be leading the audience Q&A session today. As a reminder, for those of you who have filled out the media consent form, please use the raise hand feature, and then we will call on you to unmute and ask your question. If you did not fill out the form, please feel free to message me and I will ask those questions to Mr. Clark. So let's begin. Does any members have any questions? Again, feel free to raise your hand. Anybody with questions? Okay, I see Ishan raise his hand, so feel free to ask your question.
Hi, yeah. Your background is very interesting because I read more about you, what degrees you got at UT Austin. As you mentioned, they were in like business. I know a lot of lawyers, especially in corporate law, don't go that route. They go into like history or English or another different background. Do you think there's like a lot of application in terms of like business management and corporate structuring and making like actual decisions in corporate law? Like, do your startup founders, do they call you for advice on like how to structure a deal or how to run their company? Or is it more of just like, we have a deal and we need you to go over the terms and everything?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. So the difference is at my old firm and at the traditional kind of law firm, it works the latter way that you described, where a deal has been struck, usually with some internal legal team involvement. And so if your client's a Fortune 500 company, they've got their internal lawyers, general counsels, and that sort of thing. The CEO, the board of directors, everyone is they've struck a deal, and then they call on outside counsel to execute it. Whereas now, because I'm working with startups, they often don't have, the founder is in many cases the board of directors. They're also, I guess, functionally the COO and CEO and the GC. And so the role that we serve is a little bit more fluid. So not only am I a legal advisor, I'm also a business advisor, because in many cases, the founder of a startup is a technical person. They're a software engineer. They're someone who built it, but they don't necessarily have a business background. And so they'll reach out and say like, hey, what term should I, insist on? Like how do I counteroffer this? Or what would you do if you were me? And so in that case, I function a lot more like a business advisor or a business consultant. And then the other hat that we wear a lot, so legal advisor, business advisor on business terms, yes. And then we're like therapists, because like working with like starting a company is hard. It is tough. These people pour their heart and soul, and in many cases, their entire bank account into a company. And so, sometimes they need a pat on the back to be like, hey, you can still do this. And as a result, like the relationships are very different when you're a corporate lawyer in venture capital and for startups than it is for a traditional corporate law practice where you're working with, Wall Street banks. and that sort of thing in Fortune 500 companies. Because at my old firm, all we did was interact with lawyers. And so one of our biggest clients at Sullivan was Goldman Sachs. Like, I'm not emailing any of the business principals or the CEO of Goldman Sachs. I only talk to their lawyers. And their lawyers talk to their business people, but then their lawyers tell us what to do. And that works across all of our clients. Like I worked on, the Kodak bankruptcy. And so, my interaction is with Kodak's lawyers, not with any of the business principals at Kodak. Whereas now, I've got CEOs who text, WhatsApp me all day. They want to FaceTime. Like, it's a very, our clients are a lot more, in many cases they're 10 or so years my junior. They want to FaceTime. And so I got to FaceTime. They want to talk on WhatsApp. So I got to talk on WhatsApp, that sort of thing. And our practice, and it's a lot more involved in terms of like, I'm talking to them directly versus having to have a middle person, like a lawyer in between us. But, as our clients grow over time, sometimes they do have a COO, or they'll hire a general counsel, and, the interactions directly with the CEO will be lessened as they take a step away from like kind of being in the weeds on some of those things. Good question.
Thank you so much.
And one other thing that I was gonna mention, sorry. Yeah, one other thing that I was gonna mention that you kind of alluded to at the beginning is like, I don't think you necessarily need to have any kind of business law background to do this job well, but it doesn't hurt. Like, so it wouldn't be like, if you, like in law school, I took an accounting class, because these things, like, it's important for you to kind of be at least conversant in finance terms, like knowing what EBITDA is and other, like to not be completely confused when those words get mentioned and that sort of thing. And so you don't have to go the route of having a JD MBA. It doesn't hurt if you do. But like if you've taken some business classes, particularly accounting classes, then I think those can be super helpful in this practice in particular. And I'm the hiring partner for our office in New York, and I love seeing folks who've worked as CPAs in all, like, I love those resumes. It's a big plus for me.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, that was very insightful. Any audience questions? I see that Mark has raised his hand, so you are free to ask.
Yep. So, hi, Mr. Clark. I really enjoyed your presentation. I thought it's been really insightful. And I was wondering, I heard that often when law students get out of college and they begin working at a firm in New York City, like in that area, the firm often requires them to like work long hours every day, to the tune of like, 60 hours a week or more. So can you touch on kind of the work-life balance for law students that are just getting out of college?
Yeah, and that's a very cool chair, by the way. Yeah, it's look, it's big law in New York City. We work very, very hard. And so like, if you go into, you probably understand that, the hours that are put in by investment bankers and that sort of thing. And in many cases, the firms like the one I started off with, we're working for them. And so when they're working, we're working. And so like, yeah, it's, it would not be unheard of for you to work more than 40 hours a week. That would probably be the norm. It would not be unheard of for you to work 100 hours in some weeks, when you have a really busy kind of project that requires that level of and it has that kind of time pressure on it. But so it's one of the things to kind of consider, I guess, in deciding what you want for for a career, because it is not a big law at no firm that I'm aware of in New York City. It is not a 9-to-5 job. You know, and so it's not, it is, it requires a lot of demand on your time. And the thing about it is that it's a little bit like the better you are at it, the more people are going to want to work with you and the more work you got. And so like, that's the other kind of situation, is like, the better you are at something, the more people are going to want to work with you. And, you know, and that can also put some strains on that work-life balance, because, you know, you've just got it coming in from all angles, like I kind of alluded to earlier. And so like what you'll see in a lot of cases is like, you know, same as with banking, you know, people work 2 to 4 years in banking and then they go into something else. Or consulting, they'll do it for a couple years and then they'll take that training, and then they'll go and work a job that has a bit more of a work-life balance. Big law is no different in that, you know, in many cases, people do it for a couple years, 2 to 4 years, and then they go in-house to a client. So they can start, you know, working from 9 to 5 and then just let the outside counsel work around the clock. But for some people, myself included, you know, we just love the pace and the energy of big law. And so for some folks, you know, we've decided that, you know, we're not necessarily interested in having a 9 to 5 job at this point in our careers. And so we're just going to rock out until we get tired of it.
Thank you so much.
All right,
No doubt.
very interesting. Okay, so do we have any other audience questions? Again, please feel free to raise your hand. I see that Tiffany raised her hand, so feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, what problems or setbacks have you faced as a person of color, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So, look, these industries are predominantly white. They are predominantly male, and so there are some challenges that come with that, right? You know, there are implicit bias considerations. There's a whole gatekeeping function that, like, if all the decision makers are white men, then the folks that they're bringing into their firms are in many cases, due to pattern matching and implicit bias, are going to look a lot like them. People tend to be a lot more forgiving of mistakes and judge people a lot less severely when they look like them. And so, you know, it's you know, I won't give you, like, you know, really long anecdotes, but I think, you know, it's a challenge, particularly in big law, where there aren't very many Black partners, that a lot of Black attorneys feel like they're not being looked after, they're not being mentored, they're not being given the same opportunities, and that's why there are so few of us. And so, you know, like, when I made this switch to Gunderson, one of the great things is that we have one Black partner who another Black partner who reached out to me as soon as I started, and he basically put me under his wing from the moment I set foot in the door. And then the other partners who mentored me in New York, because the Black partners is out west, were all white guys. And so in many cases, you just got to find the right person who is willing to invest in you, to really grow you as a professional. And so, don't feel obligated to pattern match when it comes to finding your mentors. They don't have to be the same gender as you, same sexual orientation, the same race and that sort of thing. Just find a person who is down to really, in my words, give you the playbook, and who you can have really honest conversations with and that sort of thing. The benefit of I think coming to a firm like mine, which when I started was like 25 lawyers in New York, was that it was a little bit like a startup in and of itself. And so, I went from being at one point the only Black attorney, a Black associate in the entire firm, to now, I think over 10% of our firm is Black. Probably 15 to 20% of our New York office is Black, or it will be by the end of this year. And go figure, I'm the hiring partner. We're going to hire more people of color. It's just kind of like, that's just kind of how it works. But like it's a place where I've never felt like I had to code switch or put on a mask. The day that I made partner, I had cornrows, I had on some Jordans, I had on a Bape hoodie. Like, I was myself and very unapologetically Black. And the firm has let me have the space to be incredibly unapologetically Black from the moment I stepped foot into into our office in Times Square, 9 years ago. And so because I felt comfortable being myself, it took a level of pressure off my shoulders that I think otherwise people of color, women, people of marginalized, communities, sexual orientation, or otherwise, they often have to deal with this added layer of pressure, and which kind of prevents you from reaching your potential on the professional side. And so, find a place to work where you don't have to wear a mask. And if you feel like you do, that's not the right place for you. And that's one of the reasons in which we've been so successful in recruiting people from marginalized communities, is because I'm able to tell them that story. And we have lots of examples of people. We're one of the most diverse law firms in all of New York City. And it's good for business, because all of our clients, startups, they come from all walks of life, and they look very, very different from like a founding team perspective. And so it enables us to be very nimble and to put together a team that's going to work really, really well with our clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was very, very interesting. I think we are closing in on time here, so I think we're just going to wrap it up. For all of our members, more information about some of our next upcoming events will be provided soon via Slack. For any of you who might be tuning in online, who may be interested in becoming a member at IBC and hearing from other speakers like Mr. Clark, please check out any of our national chapters at internatus.org/apply. I want to take a moment to thank all of our members for coming, and especially you, Mr. Clark, for taking the time out of your day to speak for us. I was at one point very interested in corporate law, so it was interesting to hear about your background and your journey and how you got into the industry. And so I hope you and everyone else here enjoys the rest of the day.